Jnananjanasalakaya Chakshurunvalitam yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namah Gurave Gaurachandraya Radhikaya Tadale Krishnaya Krishna Bhaktaya Tad Bhaktaya Namo Namo Anandalilamaya Vigrahaya Hemabadibhyascha Visundaraya Tasmai Mahaprema Rasapradaya Chaitanya Chandraya Namo Namaste Chaitanya Chandraya Namo Namaste Chaitanya Chandraya Namo Namaste Sham Sundar Sikanda Shikar Smaraha Sumuli Manohara Radhika Rasika Mama Kripanidhe Supriya Charna Kinkarim Kuru Tavai Vasmi Na Jivami Taya Vina Iti Vigyaya Devi Tam Nayamam Charantikam. First of all, I offer my Sastang Dandavat Puspanjali, my heart like flowers thousands of times at the lotus feet of my holy master, my supremely worshipable spiritual Gurudev, Asmadya Paramaradhatama, Guru Pada Padma, Nitya Pravishta Om Vishnupad, Ashtotarasata Srimad Rupanugacharya Varya, Srila Bhakti Vedanta Narayan Goswami Maharaj. Secondly, I offer my pranam thousands of times at the lotus feet of my Param Gurudev, to Srila Prabhupada and all of our Sri Rupanuga Gaudiya Guru Parampara. And finally, I offer my pranam to all the assembled Vaishnavas and Vaishnavis. Vanchakalpatarubhastha Kattvasmi Titanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo. Hari Wow. Every day the guidelines are getting bigger. I'm afraid of what may happen on Sunday. Oh, where is my dearest Krishna Chandra Prabhu?
He went to shop.
Ah. Coming now.
Сразу в группу.
Then I'm not so inspired. If he's not here, I'm not so inspired to speak. Just while we wait for Krishna Chandra, we can, if you have some burning question, you can ask. Do you have a burning question?
I have a question.
Wait. Raise your hand if you have a burning question. Raise your hand if you have a burning question that you're afraid to ask. Raise your hand if you have a burning question that you're afraid to raise your hand. Okay, yes, over here. Ananga Mohini Didi.
Yes, from your last class,
Of Srila Haridas Thakur.
from the one before, you were saying...
Uddhav.
Yes, Uddhav, exactly. Then you mentioned the silky clothes. Rather, Annie, I was just wondering, I don't know if anybody had this doubt or not.
Yes.
I'm bringing it up, but I am not sure. I believe totally what you're saying. So also from Srila Sanatana Goswami you're saying.
And Srila Rupa Goswami.
Oh, Srila Rupa.
Yes, it's mentioned in Ujjwala Nilamani. You know, if I am telling something, you should know that it's written in Shastra somewhere. Otherwise, I would not speak. Okay, yes. Radharani wears imported silk cloth from China, yes. But not sari. Many people think gopis wear sari. They don't wear saris. They wear the kanchuli. You can say now choli. It's a more modern word, but in Sanskrit kanchuli. And lahanga, skirt, and the anchal, a veil. So now they call them gopi dresses, but because that's how the gopis dress. Any other question? Yes, Braj Mohan. This Braj Mohan. Yeah. Brajanath, sorry.
Это моя вина.
А не могли бы рассказать о 8 нотах флейты Кришны?
Could you please tell about 8 notes of the Veena of Krishna?
Потому что я слышал, что первая нота...
Yes, very easy. Sarigama Padanisa.
Вот и все. He's making Panchama forbidden notes.
Потому что первая нота для Брахмы, вторая нота...
Pancham Rag is not forbidden. Pancham Swar is very good. So he's raising the question, can you say something about, because we hear very often in the poetry of great devotees, how the gopis, they want to hear the fifth note of Krishna's flute. Rupa Goswami has written, Anta Kelan Madhura Murali Panchama Jushe Manome Kalindi Pulina Vipinayas Priyahati. Radharani is saying, I am meeting with you here, Krishna, at Kurukshetra, and there's happiness in this, but I'm not fully satisfied. I want to. Wonderful, Krishna Chandra has arrived to save me from explaining this. So, I want to hear you playing the Panchama Jushe. So sometimes it said fifth note, and sometimes it said Panchama Rag. So, when Krishna plays his flute, then he plays in different ragas. And different ragas embody, they express the atmosphere of different times of the day, different seasons of the year, and also different rasas as well. Not only different rasas, but also 33 types of Sanchari bhavs can also be expressed through the playing of rag. So all of these things are explained in Sangeet Shastra.
He's saying the first note is for Brahma and then second is for this, for that.
So, Panchama Rag, Pancham Swara, this is the pitch of the bumblebees. And that's why when Krishna hears the bumblebees, then he finds the pitch. And it's also the pitch, natural pitch of the cuckoos. So, there is a group of rags called Panchama Rag, and they are exclusively for the expression of Sringarasa and Sringarasa mixed with Hasyarasa. This is the most rasic. Because when the lover and beloved meet, at first there's some trepidation, little hesitation. But then, when they begin their pastimes, and then they see each other's very beautiful bodies, then Adbhut Ras comes, astonishment. So then, Vira Ras comes, heroism, because they will have a battle. And then when all the inhibitions have gone away and they're fully absorbed in relishing their pastimes together, then Hasyaras mixes in with Madhurasa. So it said, Hasya Sringarayo Bhavat, that the Panchama Rag is expressive of the romantic mood mixed with Hasya. Madhuras or Sringaras is a primary rasa, and Hasyaras is a secondary rasa. So, in the Panchama Rag, then Rishabh and Daivat are Vajit Swara. Where's our musician?
Forbidden.
Oh, I heard him going down the hill. He was calling out to me. So in a raga, in different ragas, different notes are forbidden. So Rishabh and Daivat, that means sa re, ga ma pa dha. So re and dha, these are the Vajit Swara, forbidden notes in the Panchama raga. And there are more very confidential meanings. I don't want to speak in public. I may tell one day. Ask me privately when we're alone in Radhakund after 30 years. I'll definitely tell you that. So we were just taking a few questions while we were waiting for you to arrive. So we didn't want to start. So now we come to today's subject. A really very interesting for the neophyte devotees like myself. Perhaps for you, perhaps not. The advanced devotees. But for neophytes like myself, these very, very basic ideas of Vedanta are very helpful to make steadiness, sobriety in spiritual life. Why? Because many persons, they see a dichotomy between faith or the revelation of scriptures and reason. In fact, many people today, they see these things as being antithetical. That either you can be logical and reasonable, or if you have faith in some scripture, then you're being dogmatic. So this discussion is often framed in this way in our modern society. But actually, a spiritually advanced person who deeply understands the Shastra, the revelations of scripture, that person is also the most reasonable, rational, and logical person there is. There are a number of reasons for this. One reason is, as long as one is a slave to his senses, as long as one is affected by worldly attachment and desire, then one's ability to think and analyze will always be compromised, it will be blurred. And one will, instead of following points to their conclusion, will rather try to seek out a justification for the fulfillment of one's desire. In other words, one's reason becomes just not actually reason, but rationalization. So, only when one becomes anya bilashita shunyam, jnana kamattinavritam, that is free from even the slightest scent of worldly desire, then one's rational faculty can function freely without the partiality, without being compromised by the tendency to justify one's desires. So, therefore it is said, Shastra yukti sunipun drida sradavan drida sradaja say uttam adhikari jagatanishta. That the uttam adhikari, that is the person who has the topmost eligibility to begin the Vaidhi sadhana bhakti. So that person, they can deliver the world. They can help everyone. And their shraddha, their faith is very deep and unmoving. And they are Shastra Yukti Sunipun, completely expert in the presentation of reason and the presentation of Shastra. For them, there's no dislocation between the revelation of the scriptures and pure reasoning, uncompromised reasoning. So the person who is on the spiritual path is the most reasonable person, the most undogmatic person. Now, today I want to divide our seminar into three parts. we want to present not just a philosophy, but a meta-philosophy. Vedanta is really meta-philosophy, that is, it is the philosophy that encompasses and explains all other philosophies. It accounts for everything. That's why Vedanta Sutra has 4 chapters. And the second chapter is basically the analysis of Sad-darshan, all the 6 classical philosophical systems, and showing which parts are correct and which parts are faulty, and synthesizing all the best points, rejecting all the weaknesses, and arriving at the conclusion. Vedanta means the end of knowledge, Vedanta. And srimad-bhagavatam is Srila Vyasadeva's own explanation of Vedanta. Arto yam brahmasutranam bharatata vinirnayo. Vyasadeva has explained, is illustrated Vedanta Sutra in Srimad-bhagavatam. So, what we want to do today is first look at consciousness itself and the nature of consciousness that is the cause of us accepting a particular worldview or philosophy. So first we want to understand consciousness and how consciousness transforms and becomes the nature of our consciousness becomes the cause of something making sense to us and something else not making sense to us. Will be part 1. Then in part 2, we want to deconstruct the worldview that you have all inherited, being born at this time in Kali Yuga, in whatever Western culture, with secular education and so on. Because the culture and the ideas, the worldview into which we're born, we think that it's so normal that we don't see it. We don't even see, we just think this is the way it is, and then we analyze everything else through the lens of our own acquired conditioning. So, part 2 will be, what is the philosophical perspective that you either knowingly or even unknowingly adhere to due to the being born at this time in history and particular social conditioning and education. Then, in the part 3, we want to look at the Vedantic explanation of the conclusion of what is the immaculate, faultless, perfect angle of vision upon the world and upon ourselves, as presented in Srimad-bhagavatam. So we'll discuss this verse, which is on the board in part 3. And so, you can hear carefully, note down what we're discussing, because these 3 all combine together synergistically to give the total picture. So, first of all, we want to start with consciousness. We have a physical body, gross physical body, composed of the elements, earth, water, fire, air, and ether. It's not. And we have a subtle body also, the psychological body. Psychological body is called antakaran. That means the inner sense. We have our outward senses, jnanindriya, the knowledge acquiring senses. They function in relation to the outer world, but we have a lot of going on inside. So that's called the antakaran, the internal sense. So this internal sense, it has 4 parts. Manas, that is the mind. So mind deals with the desire, accepting and rejecting. I like this, I don't like that. Sankalpa vikalpa. Then we have intelligence, buddhi. So buddhi, the function of the intelligence, includes recognition. Recognition, that is called praman here. Pratyaksh. We perceive something, but then the intelligence recognizes it. Praman, direct recognition. So then there is viparya. Viparya means a cognition which is invalid. So the first one is a valid cognition. You see something, oh, here's a house, it's a valid cognition. But sometimes we make invalid cognition. So invalid cognition means things like identifying with the body, thinking the body is the self. Looking at the world around us and thinking that it's eternal, because we never say that it's eternal, but we act as if everything's going to be just the way it is now, forever. We don't act as if we're all going to die very soon, and everything will just disappear like bubbles in the ocean. We invest so much importance into everything, as if it were going to stay forever. So these are examples of viparya. And another example is accepting what is impure to be pure. Accepting what is a cause of suffering to be a cause of happiness. Generally we think that enjoying the senses is a cause of happiness. But that enjoyment of the senses leaves a sanskar, an impression, which causes us to try to do it again. And which causes us to feel dissatisfied in absence of that object as well. And so actually we just deepen our dissatisfaction more and more. So these are different aspects of that is invalid cognition. That we're cognizing the world but in an invalid way. So this is a function of contaminated buddhi. So then buddhi also supplies us with memory, imagination, and wakefulness, dreaming, and deep sleep. The states through which we're oscillating every day. Cannot control it so much. You can say, oh, I'm very busy, I need to do so much work. So I think for the next 7 days I won't sleep. But you cannot do it. You become mad. The buddhi will force you to go into a dream state and into a deep sleep state. And then wake you up again and like this. So buddhi is oscillating and causing us to go through these states. So another function of buddhi is vivek. Vivek means discrimination. The word vivek comes from vich dhatu, the verbal root vich, which means to make divisions. Make division. So when we look at something, their intelligence divides it into different parts. And then it takes the parts also and divides them. It makes polarities. And then prioritizes one and minimalizes another. This is the structure of our thinking. So we're discussing the antakara and the subtle psychological body. Mind, intelligence, then there's ahankar, ego. You all know what is ego. Then, the last one is called chitta. Now, chitta is basically the stuff from which all four are made. Chitta is a very, very fine psychological element. It's also known as mahatattva in the universe. But when that element is in your subtle body, it's called chitta. And chitta is sattvic. It's very light, very luminous. And when a portion of that chitta becomes filled with impressions, the chitta means practically your subconscious mind, which is filled with impressions of so many past activities. So when the chitta, which is light by nature, becomes darkened by many worldly, physical impressions of sense gratification, then that darkened, condensed mass of impressions, that is actually ego, ahankar. So ahankar is called vasanamayi. It is a dense collection of many worldly impressions that has darkened the chitta. So you just identify and hanker for the external world. That is, your impressions are echoing into your mind and making you, because you think, oh, I desire this, I don't want that. But all these choices are coming just because an impression from the subconscious mind is coming into the conscious mind. And if you had a past experience with an object which was pleasurable, then you say, I want it. If you had a past experience with an object that was unpleasurable, then you say, I don't want it. So even though people feel themselves to be very independent, they feel themselves to be making their decisions in real time, the reality of the fact is that due to the darkness of ego, they're identifying with the body, and then whichever samskars are coming into the conscious mind, they're just going along with the flow of that, thinking, this is my desire. Now the soul is transcendental, and beyond this, all these things. But the light of consciousness from the soul is reflected into the chitta. And then the chitta is darkened by ego, and then intelligence is calculating with the world, and the mind is deciding what you want and what you don't want based on past impressions. So this is how life is going on. So everyone feels very free, but actually the souls are in like a dream state practically. And their mind, the mental functions are just flowing, and they're going along with that. And that's why the sages say the living entities are in bondage. People think, I'm free, but they're actually exactly like a bull with a ring through his nose being dragged through their destiny. So one person thinks, I'm free, and the sage is looking because he can see all the functions of the antakaran in himself and in others as well. See, this person is completely in bondage. But that person doesn't know. Now, just to assimilate this point, that the ego, the mind, the intelligence and the mind are actually just contaminated transformations of chitta. The antakaran is one substance, chitta. And when it becomes darkened by tamagun, it becomes ego. And a portion of the ego becomes the intelligence, a portion of the ego becomes mind. Like this. So there's one substance, chitta. Now, this chitta is atomic in nature. And it exists in the region of the heart chakra. Now, this chitta can expand and contract. And it expands and contracts in the akash. Akash means space, inner and outer space. You can see in the third canto, Kapila Dev said, Bhutanam chitradhatritvam bahe antaram evacha pranindriyatva disnyatvam nabaso pritilakshanam. Means that akash or space can be recognized by certain characteristics. So the first one is Bhutanam chitradhatritvam. Akash is that element that gives room to accommodate the outer world and the inner world. You see, all things have extension in space. So that space for them to extend, that is provided by Akash. And in the same way, Pranindriyatma disnyatvam. Disnyatva means a foundation or a field, a support. That Akash is also the support for Pran, Indriya, and here Atma means the Chitta, the Antakaran. In other words, the Akash, your internal space, is the meeting place of your senses, your Pran, and your Chitta, your mind, if you like. So because the three meet together in the Akash, then the things that you do with your senses affect your mind. And the things that you do with your mind affect your senses. We'll give an example. Just like there was a very popular conclusion, philosophical conclusion, that it's perfectly okay to watch very violent or sexual movies or theatre because what you see doesn't affect who you are. Right? But then again, at the same time, if someone is watching some big sport event like the Super Bowl, then companies are paying millions of dollars for a 1-minute advertisement. Why are they paying millions of dollars for just a 1-minute advertisement if what you see doesn't affect your behavior? Everything that you see affects you. Everything you see affects you. So, if you see very violent things or disturbing things, it will. You can say, oh, well, I've got a thick skin, it won't affect, but it will. And slowly many experiences change us. And it's because our senses and our mind meet together on the platform of the Akash, and the senses leave impressions in the mind, and they accumulate and they change our internal atmosphere. So always try to be very careful to only bring in spiritual influences into your internal atmosphere, to maintain your internal sanctity, purity. And therefore we have in our Krishna conscious practice 4 regulative principles. Because becoming involved in intoxication and so on, in the promiscuity, gambling, meat eating, that means violence towards animals, all of these things, they do affect our consciousness in a very negative way, and that makes an obstacle to the progress of spiritual life. Now, what's very interesting here is that because the chitta is accommodated in Akash, that means the chitta has extension. So our chitta can expand and contract. It expands and contracts. So, the more the chitta is expanded, the more peaceful you feel. And the more the chitta is contracted, the more nervous and disturbed you feel. Why? Because you're always interacting with the world. So to interact with the world, you have many thoughts, many ideas. And all these thoughts and ideas are essentially waves in the chitta. They're oscillations of the chitta is modifying, moving around. And so all of our thoughts, our feelings, our desires, they're just waves in the chitta. So, if the chitta is contracted, if it's small, then the same waves are very influential. They can destabilize us. Because the chitta is small, there are waves there, and the chitta is small, so it's very destabilizing. But if the chitta is broad, then those same waves, this makes very little effect. Just like if there's a fish like this, and he's swimming in the ocean, he cannot disturb the ocean. But if that little fish is in a little bowl like this, he can splash around, and he can splash the water out of the bowl and make a big disturbance. So in the same way, all people, when they come into a situation, they respond in different ways. So if a person's consciousness is contracted, then when they face a difficulty or a challenging situation, then the mind is trying to figure it out, but it becomes a big disturbance in there. Because essentially, the oscillation density, the density of the oscillations in their chitta is much higher. Whereas a person whose consciousness is very broad, they come into the same situation, and they're seeing it, recognizing some oscillations are coming. But because their chitta is so broad, they're unaffected, they remain peaceful. You know, there's that poem by Kipling. If you can keep your head when all around you are losing theirs. Right? So, if a person's chitta is very expanded, then any problem doesn't. They remain peaceful because they have very low oscillation density. So they're peaceful. And those with a contracted chitta, then, just a little difficulty and it's very disturbing for them. So, if the chitta is very contracted, then the oscillations, the functions of the mind can't even take place properly. And that's why we see, if a person has a more expanded consciousness, they have a very great spectrum of emotions and thoughts, very nuanced. But when a person's consciousness is contracted, then they have basically 2 emotions, lust and anger, and not many nuances. Right? They're happy when they're lusty, and when they don't have a chance for that, they become angry. So the whole spectrum of emotion, because the chitta just can't function. So because it's just so contracted. Now, the expansion and the contraction takes place as a result of the gunas. Sattva gun means expansion. Rajagun is a contraction with lots of mental activity, and then tamagun is a very extreme, acute contraction where even the mind can't function, it's so contracted. Sattva, Rajas and Tamas. So, when there's more sattva gun, we can focus, we can concentrate. And that concentration actually makes the chitta expand even more. The principle that the chitta expands when we concentrate on an object is applicable to everyone, whether they're in sattva, rajas or tamas. And herein lies the tragic mistake of human beings, that they think that happiness lies in tasting objects of the world. And the reason is this, that when you enjoy the taste of something, then your mind becomes one-pointed in that sensory experience. And because you are focused, when you focus on something, the chitta expands and you feel peace. So then, you feel peace, you feel sukha, you feel happiness. See? So for example, if a person, they really like chocolate, right? So then they take the chocolate, they may have many problems in their life. They're stressed out, they have financial problems, they have relationship problems, they have health problems, whatever it is. And they just think, I need some chocolate. Right? So then they get the chocolate and they begin to peel it. It's like a butchudi, you know. They withdraw their mind from everything else, and they just look. And then when they taste it, then the mind is totally absorbed in that taste, and they forget everything. So now the mind is focused on one thing, and because the mind is focused on one thing, it starts to expand. And that feeling of expansion then moves, peace, happiness, relief. So, and the same, we give an example, ladies especially, they like to seek shelter and comfort in chocolate. But men are different. Men find their shelter and their peace in soccer. See? So, football. Yeah. So it's the same principle, you know, when they turn on the TV and then for 90 minutes or however long the game is, the mind is totally fixed on the ball. And the ball is just... Mind is completely fixed for 90 minutes on one point. And because the mind, when the mind is fixed on one object, it starts to expand. Then it feels so good, peacefulness, happiness. So the principle is there for everyone. When you chant mantra, you fix your mind on the mantra, just keep it on the mantra, and you feel, because your mind is on one point, your chitta is expanding. You feel, so nice. I was disturbed before, I was in anxiety, and now I'm feeling peacefulness. So, one word for akash. The expansion takes place in akash. So the one Sanskrit word for akash is ka. Ka. Ka means akash. You know, Krishna says shabda ke means I am the sound in ka. Ke means in the ka. So the prefix in Sanskrit, the prefix su means beautiful, and the prefix du means like bad, like good and bad. Su, good, beautiful, and du, bad. So the words happiness and distress in Sanskrit actually ontologically describe what happiness and distress is. Happiness is sukha, beautiful akash. In other words, your chitta has expanded in the ka, so this is sukha, beautiful inner space. And dukkha means your chitta has contracted and now it's congested with so many thoughts and feelings that are clashing with each other even. You can't function mentally and you're in anxiety. This is dukkha. This is the bad space. So the good space and the bad space. That is sukha and dukkha. Now, because people have this repeated experience that when I try to enjoy something, I become focused on enjoyment, my chitta expands in the akash. So they confuse, oh, this is happiness lies here. But that contact with the sense object is what? Huh? It is adyantavanta kunteya, nati shuramate Buddha. Yeah, same thing. Yehi samsparshaja boga dukkha yonaya evate. This contact of the sense with the object is actually the birthplace of dukkha, misery. Why? Because adyantavanta kunteya. It has an end. In other words, that sense object will be there only for a moment, and then when it's gone, then you had an artificial expansion, and then there'll be a rapid contraction. And the contraction will be more of a contraction than it was before. So, sense gratification makes you become more miserable. Makes you become more miserable. And another thing is that the physical body only has a certain capacity for experience, physical experience. And so what happens is, the more the body tries to experience the world, the more its capacity gets burnt, goes down. Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Thakur said literally that the living beings in this world, they're like chain smokers. You know? A chain smoker gets a cigarette and he's smoking, he's burning the cigarette, and before this one goes out, he lights another one, and then he burns through so many cigarettes. So the conditioned soul is like that, he's burning through so many bodies. And the activity of each body is making the next body. Like this. So, we've discussed a few principles. So one is that our consciousness is reflected into the chitta, and through the chitta we feel happiness or we feel distress. The happiness comes from concentration. But if we concentrate on external sense object, that will result very quickly in a contraction. But if we'll concentrate on something which is eternal and transcendental and can be never taken away from you, then the expansion will just continue and continue and continue. Srila Sanatana Goswami Pad said, the ultimate expansion is when the chitta becomes tadatmik with a siddharup. So a contracted chitta cannot even conceive of what a spiritual body is like. But the expanded, purified chitta actually becomes tadatmik, becomes one with the spiritual form. And this is why Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur discusses 5 levels of expansion or contraction of the chitta. The first one is called achadita chaitana, covered consciousness. Like trees, like mountains. Their consciousness is so contracted, it's covered. You look at them, you think these things are not even alive. People doubt whether trees actually has consciousness or not. Because we know that trees have consciousness. Everything which grows and reproduces itself is living. There's a soul in there somewhere. So then after achadita chaitana, then there is the sankuchita chaitana. Not covered, but sankuchita is contracted. Sankuchita. Contracted consciousness, that is the consciousness of animals. So because their chitta is quite contracted, they don't have a broad spectrum of thoughts and feelings. The animals don't have the capacity to discuss the difference between Advaitavad, Shuddha-dvaitavad, Dvaita-dvaita. It's just way too much. But they know they have some basic emotions. They also have some attachment to their offspring, you know, and they feel some happiness and distress. They feel some anxiety, some basic emotions are there, but they have sankuchita, contracted consciousness. And then there is mukhalita, that means consciousness is just starting to bud now, just starting to open. So human beings have that. And then human beings are doing sadhana, actually striving to understand the truth, understand God. That is called vikasita chaitana, more expanded or blossoming consciousness. And then those who attain Krishna Prem, purna vikasita chaitana, the lotus of their heart is fully expanded. So this is our first subject that we're discussing today, of the 3 topics. That is, understand how, though the soul is transcendental, in the conditioned state, its consciousness is reflected in the chitta, which expands and contracts, and the expansion and the contraction of our consciousness is the cause of our internal psychological experience of feeling good or feeling bad. So also we have these phrases in English, narrow-minded. Someone's narrow-minded. Yeah, and Mahatma, and broad-minded as well. So generally we use this phrase, we think they're very figurative. They're figurative phrases. But actually, they're literal. A person who's broad-minded is literally Vikasita Chaitana, is literally, the chitta is broad. And a person who is narrow-minded, their chitta is literally narrow, it's contracted. So, now let's apply this, let's take this understanding and apply it into some practical subjects. For example, religion. Religion is often, with people nowadays, unpopular. Why? Because there are so many rules of stuff that you can't do. And I just can't be happy without doing all this stuff that religions tell me that I can't do. But there's a reason. It's not that the religious movements are dogmatic, but there's a profound wisdom there. The things, whatever the commandments or whatever they're called in each religion, in yoga they're called the yams and niyams, right? The 5 restraints and the 5 prescribed activities, things you have to do and things that you should not do. So yam and niyam, the first 2 angas of yoga, of Astanga yoga. In Christianity they have the 10 commandments and so on. Now, essentially these directives are telling you, don't do this because even though momentarily it feels good, but in the long run it will cause contraction of your consciousness. And if you will not do it, if you'll have self-restraint, if you'll avoid this activity, though it may be uncomfortable now, it will lead to the gradual expansion of your consciousness. And when your consciousness is expanded, you will feel sukha, really happy, and a happiness which is independent of any physical situation. You see? So if you want to know what is dharma and adharma, we can summarize it in this way. Dharma is that mode of life which leads to the long-term result of the expansion of your chitta. Because dharma leads to sattva. And adharma, irreligion, is that mode of activity which, in the pretty short term actually even, leads to the contraction of your chitta, and it will make you feel miserable. So essentially that is what is dharma and adharma, in a nutshell. We're speaking in very, very universal terms here. But nowadays, people, they're very much in a contracted consciousness. So they don't have the foresight to see that the worldly, physical, materialistic lifestyle is the cause of their suffering. And if they'll follow a spiritual path, if they'll follow a religious path, they will become more broad-hearted. They see everything the other way around. Oh, you're so narrow-minded. What's wrong with sex, drugs and rock and roll? Be more open. So, no. We know that these things cause the contraction of consciousness more and more. And those who live a life of self-restraint and purity, as they get older and older, they're shining. And they feel that such contentedness within, because the sukha, the chitta has expanded nicely. Okay? So, commercial break.
I've tried to stop it. Okay, good.
Thank you. So, now we want to move on to another subject. It's still chitta, but we're making a segue from consciousness and how consciousness decides what kind of philosophy we follow. when the consciousness is contracted, people don't think very deeply. Their thoughts are not trenchant. Trenchant, it means penetrating. Trenchant means that your thoughts can penetrate into a subject, to see beyond the superficial appearances. So, we can illustrate it in a very simple way. That if you throw a small stone at a cat, towards a cat, the cat will watch the stone bounce, 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 and then spinning around. And when it stops, then the cat will wait and see, what is this stone going to do next? But if you throw a stone in the direction of a dog, the dog won't even look at the stone where the stone went. He'll just look up and say, who threw that at me? You see? And the reason is because the consciousness of the cat is more contracted than the consciousness of the dog. And the more contracted the consciousness is, the more we focus on the initial appearance. And we cannot think in terms of the chain of cause and effect. So the cat sees the appearance of what's coming and thinks this thing is independent and is the cause. Whatever it's doing, it itself is the cause of that. When I was a little boy, I used to roll up some paper and make like a mouse out of paper, and then put it on the end of a piece of cotton, and then put it down by a cat. And then the cat looks at it and doesn't do anything. But then you just slowly pull the other end of the piece of cotton. So then when that little paper mouse starts to move, then the cat jumps like that, and then you pull it quick so that the cat just misses it. And then the cat looks again and you pull slow, and the cat jumps again. You can like do this, and the cat just keeps jumping and jumping and jumping. Right? You try that stuff with the dog. The dog will just look at you like, are you stupid? You see? Because the cat just can't figure it out. The cat's just thinking, this thing is moving, I'm going to catch it, whoop, and then it's gone, and then whoop, and again and again. But the dog sees, oh, there's a string on the end of this, and he's holding it, and he thinks, I'm going to run after this, forget it. Huh? Because the more the consciousness is expanded, the more we can see something, but then think about, well, what's the cause of that? What's behind that? What's behind that? What's behind that? So, if we don't think what's behind things, then we're not even thinking about reality. We're just dealing with appearances, just superficial appearances. And even we may be very, very logical. But if we only apply our logic to the appearances, due to contraction of consciousness, then we don't come to a real conclusion, we only have the appearance of a conclusion. So then you can be very puffed up and think, well, I'm super logical. I'm Dr. Spock, you know? I'm Sherlock Holmes. I'm so rational, you know? But actually, yes, your logic, it may be sound. It may be sound. But if you are applying your logic to only the superficial appearance of things, then you are totally wrong. Totally wrong about everything. So, now we want to move on to we've completed our first part now. Now we've made the segue, we're going into the next subject. And that is philosophy, different philosophical views. So let's just go back about 3,000 years to the classical age. Classical age means Socrates, Plato. They had a particular view of the world. So, Plato's idea was that nothing in this world can be explained without reference to a transcendent ideal. Now that might sound ridiculous to people today. If you have a part, let's say you have a part, right? And then Plato will say, we cannot explain this. We cannot say what it is without reference to a transcendental ideal. You say, well, that's ridiculous. But this is just a thing right here. Here it is. Let's explain it. Let's talk about what it is. Now, Plato what is he talking about? Making things complicated. So, no. These are the thoughts of a person with expanded consciousness, not like the people of today. These are the thoughts of a person with expanded consciousness. So we'll give an example why. Whether you take the Vedic metaphysical point of view or modern science, everything is made of the same stuff. Right? Atoms. Right? Everything's made of the same stuff. The atom's made of protons and neutrons, just they're configured in different ways and we call them different elements of the periodic table. But basically, everything is made of the same stuff. Now, since all the substance around us, everything is made of the same stuff, then it cannot be the cause of the varieties that we see. The varieties of shapes that we see around us cannot be caused by the stuff that they're made of, because the stuff is all the same. So if the stuff is all the same, it would only produce one thing. If it were producing by itself. Right? So the very fact that there are varieties of forms everywhere must mean that there's something else acting on that stuff, which is the origin of those forms. Huh? Is that clear? Yeah. Let's say if you have some porridge, right? So then you get the bowl of porridge and you throw it on the table, right? Like that. So then you get another bowl of porridge and throw it on the table, like that. Every single time it just makes like a blob, right? Every time, right? You won't throw it there and it looks like the Pieta, Michelangelo's Pieta. Or you throw it another time and it comes out like the shape of an iPhone or something like that. It's one substance, always comes out. There may be some slight varieties, but it's not going to come out. Look at the varieties of everything in the world. There must be some plan, some blueprint, some design which is acting upon this stuff, the same stuff which is everywhere, to bring about the different forms. So Plato gave the example of his cave, that there were some people living in a dark cave, and there was a little bit of light shining in the cave, and something was going on outside, but just the shadows of that were on the wall in the cave. And people were looking and they thought that this was real life. These shadows moving on the wall, that's all there is to life. Then one day someone escaped from the cave and he went outside and he saw that there were actual people with shapes and colors and everything. And then he went back in the cave. He said, everyone, come on, let's go. There's another world. And they said, no, you're crazy. This is life. This is the world. These shadows dancing on. This is the world. So in the same way, an enlightened person knows that there's another world. And that the forms of this world are only shadows. The forms of this world are like the reflections of the original transcendental forms. So Plato, he suggested this, that how can we explain what this is? We can, let's say it's a part. We say it's a part. Why? Because there's an eternal transcendent ideal called a part. And the degree to which the elements here participate in that partness, then we call it a part. Let's say there's such a thing as a human. Let's start with something really simple. Let's say there's such a thing called an apple. Right? So when you see an apple or some apples, you say, here's an apple. That means here is an example of an apple. Right? But if you get all the apples in the world, you say, here's an apple, here's an apple, here's an apple. These are all examples of something called apple. But what's apple? Right? What you're saying is these are all examples of some universal thing that has appleness. And all of these particulars are participating in the universal form of apple. So for example, you say there's a human, right? So here's a human, there's a human, there's a human. But what is human? These are examples, but where is this thing called human that we're all examples of? And also, that if a person is participating in that universal of humanity, a person may participate more or less. So some persons are more humane, and other people are less humane, depending on the degree to which they participate in the universal ideal of humanity. You see? So, Plato said that we recognize everything and things take shape because they're participating in these eternal, transcendent universals. So, for Plato, universals are real. They have an existence. They have their own world. And everything here is just a shadow of that. So, that became known, for Plato, that philosophy was called realism. But now it's become known as exaggerated realism. So, can someone stick it on the wall? Let's just stick it right here. Who's got the sticky?
There's also this one. Ну как это называется? Гвоздь.
No, where's the sticky stuff? Scotch tape, yes. No, there's scotch tape. So, is everyone on the same page? Yeah? So the reason why people have called it's realism, but the reason they called it exaggerated realism is because the idea is that the things of this world are secondary. And the real world is a transcendental and eternal world which has its own existence beyond this world. So, you can put it up, and then we're going to have another one below, and another one below, and another one below. So, this is, yeah, okay. So, in the early days of Christianity, in the first century, just after the first century of Christianity, there was a saint named Saint Justin. And Saint Justin is considered in Orthodox and Catholicism and in Protestantism, in all the denominations, he's considered to be the patron saint of philosophy. The patron saint of philosophy. So Saint Justin said that Plato is the doorway to Christianity. It's the doorway to Christianity. Because by discussing the subject matter of transcendent universals, just an ordinary common person, if they understand that, then they'll develop a belief that there's another world, that there's a transcendental world, and when we die, our objective is to attain that world. There's a perfect, eternal, transcendental world. So, for the person who doesn't have a spiritual or religious faith, they can follow Plato's idea, and it will lead them into that conclusion of the superiority of a religious or Christian life. And also, the early Christian philosophers, they took the concept of universals to explain their basic religious principles. For example, how can one understand the relationship between God and His Son, Jesus, and the Holy Spirit? Are they different or are they one? So the idea is that there's one universal Godhead, and that one universal is embodied in three particulars: the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Or we say Bhagavan, Bhakta, and Bhakti. God, His devotee, and the devotion. You see? So there's one universal reality, and that universal reality is embodied in these three particulars, like that. So the Trinity was, in Christianity, was explained loaning from the Platonism. Then, another example, the communion. When it's essentially like offering prasadam, right? When they get the wine and the bread, and they make an offering, and now the bread becomes the body of Christ, and the wine becomes the blood of Christ. So that means that he sacrificed his body joyfully in the service of God for the benefit of others, to teach others humility and tolerance that is required to attain transcendence. So when we ingest that, then we become like him, very humble, very tolerant, very faithful in God. So how can this bread and wine become the body of Christ? Why? Because his body is a transcendental universal, and the universal is instantiated in the particulars. So even though it was bread before, but the substance behind it that you cannot see, you're only seeing the superficial, but the substance behind it is now become transubstantiated. And the universal is now present in the particulars when you take that, so every day. So we also function in the same way. We offer the food to Krishna and it becomes transubstantiated. Now it becomes Mahaprasadam. It becomes spiritual, it becomes non-different from Krishna. And then when we take it, we also become transformed. So another way is in Christianity they use the concept of sin also. That the universal sin, what was committed originally, is present in all the particulars of us. So the original sin is present in all human beings. So as Vaishnavas, we don't exactly believe that, but something a little analogous, and that is that the jivas have anadi karma. They have karma without any beginning. And those impressions are lodged in the Mahatattva of the universe. So any soul who is in this world is immediately connected with the universal nature of karma, which separates us from God. So it's not exactly, but the Christian explanation is more or less acceptable in practical life. Another idea that how Platonism was used is in regard to the church. The church was considered a transcendental universal, and when people come together to sing hymns or whatever, then the universal church becomes present in the particulars of the congregation, and they all become like one. So this is how the ancient Greek philosophy was used in Christianity in the early days. Nowadays people, they turn their back very often on their culture and their history because they think it's not reasonable. But actually it's very, very reasonable. But it's reasonable to those whose consciousness is expanded. It's not reasonable to those who have a contracted consciousness. So now let's move away a little from Plato's exaggerated realism. After him, one of his students named Aristotle, he didn't speak about that exaggerated realism. He spoke what is called now moderate realism. And that means that the universals don't have their own world. They don't exist in their own world. They never exist separately from the objects in which they are embodied. So we can say this is a pot, this is a pot, this is a pot. They're all united by the universal of potness. So this concept is same also in India in Nyaya of Gautam Rishi. The Sanskrit word for universal is samanya, universal, or it's also called jati. So in Vedic culture they will say, this is a pot. It's a pot because it embodies the universal jati called potness. What is potness? Potness is that which resides in all things called pot, and which does not reside in all things not called pot. This is the formulated sutra of Nyaya. Okay, so I won't go too much into that, but
связано в горшках, и то, что не содержится не в горшках, как бы.
То есть независимо от горшков, она не существует.
Да.
But in Nyaya, in India, there's this concept of jati. For example, you can say that, oh, this shirt is green, these leaves are green, and that tree is green. So there's one universal greenness, and that one universal greenness is present in three particulars: the shirt, the leaves here, and then the trees over there. So this is how they think about universals in Vedic culture. Oh, now everyone's chitta expanded. So, according to Nyaya, atoms are invisible. You can't see them. So when they combine together to make, say, a pot, you're not perceiving the atoms, but there's the appearance of the universal in it, and that's what you're perceiving. So perception is called the savikalpa pratyaksh. Recognition is called savikalpa pratyaksh. When there's a dravya, there's a substance, and then you make your intelligence makes a relationship between the substance and the jati, which is inherent in it. That's called savikalpa pratyaksha. This philosophy of Nyaya is very deep, very interesting. If you understand it, then you'll understand Jiva Goswami's explanation of the holy name as well, which is the holy name is not a product of the vikalpa. So that's another subject. But what we're discussing here now is Aristotle gave an idea which is very similar to Gautam Rishi's Nyaya Shastra in Vedic culture, and that is that the universals exist in their objects. Aristotle said they only exist in their objects. In India, the universals are actually everywhere. They eternally exist. They're all pervading, but they only become visible in their objects. They don't have their own transcendental world. So there's a little difference between Gautam Rishi and Aristotle. So let's just put Aristotle's moderate realism there, just right underneath there. So then, as history went on, Plato was very popular, and then that is the awareness of expanded consciousness. But when consciousness contracts somewhat, then you don't believe that there's a transcendental world. So then universals only become present in the things that you can see. Right? But then, as the consciousness becomes more contracted, then the next stage of philosophy was called Conceptualism. And that is that universals don't have a mind-independent existence at all. Universals are not in a spiritual world. They don't exist mind-independently in the objects. But universals are just a concept that you have in your mind. Conceptualism. And so we have this concept, there's such a thing called human. And there are different examples of human beings, but it's just a concept in the mind. It's that humanness doesn't exist physically or abstractly even in any dimension other than in your thoughts. Appleness, potness, a cow. This is a cow, this is a cow. So what is the cow? There's a universal cow present here and there. No. There's only a concept that there's a thing called a cow. So all universals are just in your mind. That is called conceptualism. And then after that, when the consciousness contracted even more, how does consciousness contract? By engaging in adharma, irreligious activity. So as the whole society, humanity as a whole, becomes more and more irreligious, so their consciousness contracts and moves further and further away from the ideas of transcendence to just the here and now. And just the superficial appearance of what's going on here and now. So then gradually philosophers came along and they said, oh, there we go. Let's put conceptualism up there. They said, actually, the universals don't even exist in your mind. They don't even exist in your mind. Why? Put it this way. Let's say there are so many cows all over the world, right? Now I want you to think of a cow, not any particular cow, But just, the universal cow. Think of it right now. You can't really. So they're saying that you can't have a concept which is really of an abstract universal. When you think conceptually, you always think of a particular and not of a universal. So if I say think of catness, you'll actually think of a cat that you know, maybe your own cat or someone else's cat or whatever, like that. But you'll think of a particular, not a universal. And therefore, there's no such thing as conceptual universals. Because all concepts are actually particulars. Right? So then, what is universal? The only thing that's universal is the word that we use to describe it. Right? So let's say I say think of cat. You cannot. You think of a particular cat. But the only thing that is common to all those things called cat is the word that you use to describe them. The name. It's the name that you use. So when you think that there's nothing universal except for words, the names that you use, that is called nominalism. There it goes. Oh.
So who preach conceptualism?
Excuse me?
Who preach the person who advocated
Oh, many philosophers put forward, but we could say
the first one.
William of Ockham. William of Ockham was one of the earliest philosophers of conceptualism.
Which day?
Oh, that's like medieval times. Yeah. So, now we come to nominalism. Now, believe it or not, you have all been educated in the philosophy of nominalism. Huh? Nominalism means that every single thing can be known as it is, as a self-independent identity, without reference to any universal. And so now, there's no universal good, there's no universal bad, there's no universal morality, there's no universal anything. It's a free-for-all. Everyone is, and that nominalism is the product of the, as Kali Yuga is progressing from thousands of years ago to the present day, the gradual contraction of consciousness that makes one become like meow, like the cat who's only seeing what's right in front of his nose and unable to think in terms of cause and effect, going beyond appearances. Now remember that the realism, the exaggerated realism, came just from thinking about, well, everything is the same substance. What's the cause of the forms? We can't explain the forms. So it's an extended consciousness. But when our consciousness is very contracted, now we just see what's there, the superficial thing, and we say, now I can explain this without reference to any type of transcendental universal. Okay? So, nominalism is really like the cardinal sin of philosophy. Why? Because if we were to look at an object, and speed up time, you'll see that all the objects around us, they're coming out of the earth, taking a form and then disappearing again. Right? One human being is eating, taking food from the earth, putting in his body, growing, another human being is coming from the body of that human being, this human being is turning back into dust. Right? That human being is getting some more earth, it's going into his body and his body's growing, that body's producing another body, and in the meantime his body's turning into dust. It's like the whole world is in a constant flux. It's just one energy in a flux, like so many bubbles in the ocean. But the ocean's just making bubbles because it's one thing. But we'll see that this totality of material energy is making tall human beings, short human beings, fat, thin, blonde, black, white, Chinese, Africans, all types, animals, flying birds, dogs, cats, horses, everything. Like all the, how is it that from this basic substance, what's making all of these forms? There has to be something behind it. So a person whose consciousness is expanded, That's just a completely rational and ordinary thing to do. That to see that any object cannot be separated from its past and from its future and from whence it has come and from where it's going. So to just say, here's a thing, I can explain it without any reference to its context, then it's not reasonable, it's not rational. I'm just unreasonably, irrationally, and arbitrarily ripping the object out of its entire location, out of its entire context, and saying, now I'll tell you what it is. But you can't do that. Why? Because meaning is a relationship between an object and its context. That's what meaning is. When you see a word on a page, the meaning of that word depends on the sentence before and the sentence after. So meaning is a relationship between an object and its context, its location. So what nominalism does is, it looks at each object and irrationally and arbitrarily just takes away all the context completely and says, we're just going to explain this. Now by removing the context, what have you done? You've removed the meaning from everything. Now nothing has a meaning. There's no meaning in anything anywhere. Is this starting to sound familiar to you? Right? Is it starting to sound familiar? Because we've all in this age been educated unknowingly from childhood to think in nominalistic terms. To see everything with pratagdrisha, a vision of separation. To look at them one by one, take out the context. And then the meaning is gone. And that not only applies to the meaning of all the things around us, but it also applies to the meaning of us as well. Here I am. I am this independent, separate, biological mechanism. Right? That's who I am. I can explain myself. Look, there's some water, there's about 74% water, there's some carbon here, some calcium in the bones, right? I'm just this biological thing. Huh? There's no, well, where did I come from? Where am I going? What am I doing here? Huh? There's no thought of this. So now we've drained every object, including ourselves, we've drained everything of all meaning. But something remains. One thing remains. The urges of your senses. And so now the only thing that has meaning is satisfying one's appetites. The satisfaction of the appetites. And that is animal life. Ahani tribaya maitunam cha. Eating, we feel the need to eat. We feel the need to have sex. We feel the need to fight, to defend ourselves from others, and we feel the need to sleep in comfort. That's real. And so now that becomes the context and the meaning of everything that we do. And that's material life. So when the consciousness is contracted, then we have a vision, the nominalistic vision. All meaning leaks out of the world, and the only thing that has meaning is our own appetite. And so that's modern society now. You go into any newsagent or any bookstore, you'll just see all books and magazines and everything just telling you, there's all books about food, right? There's all books about how to make yourself look beautiful so that you can get some sex. There's books about how to have decorate your home decorations, stuff like that. And then there's books about whatever, boxing and martial arts, how to defend yourself. Books about politics, which is all about defense and everything, and so on, like that. And so, even though all these things are logical, but they're not rational, it's just appetites gone wild, because we've completely lost the meaning of life. No meaning in life at all. So, this meaningless life, this vision of nominalism, is completely irrational. Why? I'll give an example from Christian theologians, then I'll give an example from Vedanta. And it's the same example basically. When we look at ourselves, let's not arbitrarily and irrationally rip ourselves from the context of existence and just see what's here. If we want to know the meaning of something, we have to see that object in its entire context. So, if we look at ourselves in our entire context, we see that we are not independent, but we are dependent. We are dependent. We need air. We have not created ourselves, and we have not created the world. We are not responsible for the things upon which we are dependent. We cannot create air, we cannot create water, we cannot create food. Any scientist in a laboratory, they can make a supercomputer with 1,000,000 gigs memory, but they cannot make 1 grain of rice. You cannot eat the computer. You can eat the rice, but they cannot make 1 grain of rice. So, and even if they were to synthesize it, but the things they made it from, they cannot make that either. So, we are dependent on so many things. Now, because everything comes from a cause, there must be one original cause. So everything has come from ourselves, and the things we are dependent on have come from an original cause. So because the things we are dependent on have come from an original cause, therefore we ourselves are dependent on that original cause. We're thinking we're dependent on the food in the refrigerator, right? But we're not looking at we're not doing nominalism and looking at the food in the package. We're looking at the entire picture, a holism. Look at the totality of reality. So this is the nature of the expanded consciousness. It looks at the totality. And the contracted consciousness, because it's contracted, it can only look at something just very locally here. So when we look at the totality, we see that I have a cause, the things I am dependent on have a cause, and therefore I am dependent on that cause. So my relationship with my cause is one of service, one of surrender, because I am dependent ultimately on that cause. So the Vedas in Vedanta exactly the same thing is given. It's described that how can we understand our position? There are 5 koshas. First one is Anamai kosh. The recognition that I am a being dependent on food. Anamai kosh. Then the next level is the Pranamai kosh. To function, I am dependent on pran, air. Well, by breathing, then my pran is nourished. And so then my bodily functions can go on. Pran is not exactly air. But when we breathe the air due to the function of pran, then the pran becomes enlivened. And all of our biological functions can go on. Then manamai kosh. In order to think, I'm dependent on the mind, which is also not me. And can be impaired or improved also. And then Vijnanamai. Vijnanamai means to understand Atma, the soul, and also Paramatma. They're both Vijnanamai. Because the Paramatma does not have Anandamoy Lila, pastimes of it. The next level is Bhagavan, Krishna, Anandamoy. So, it is very, very reasonable. It's completely reasonable to accept that I am a soul and I am a servant of God. Any other conclusion is simply not reasonable at all. Maybe logical, but not reasonable at all. So, now, let's go on to the Vedic world. You compare the Vedic world with the modern world, and you can see that all the things of the modern world have their root in a nominalistic worldview caused by contracted consciousness. And all this culture of the Vedic worldview has its roots in the expanded consciousness, with an idea that things only have meaning when they're related to a transcendental reality. So for example, if we take modern society, people are struggling in so many different ways and they have different answers. So someone says, well, the answer is capitalism. Someone else says, no, the answer is socialism. Someone else says, no, the answer is communism. Someone else said, no, the answer is anarchism, whatever it is. So they have all different ideas, concepts about social systems, how to uplift the world. Even though all these ideas seem contradictory with each other, they all have something in common. They could not exist without nominalism. They all start from the fact that the world is just this individual set of things without any meaning, and the way we can improve our condition is just by manipulating the things to try to make the things in a better situation. Huh? So all of these ideas, their root is just one. Nominalism. A meaninglessness which leads to just manipulation of the world for the sake of, what's the best political system? The best political system is the political system in which everyone can fulfill their appetites. Right? So all meaning is gone. Again, all meaning is gone, and it's just down to the appetites. Whereas in Vedic culture, then how can society become successful? Because we're all part of the whole, and we're all dependent on the whole. Then each one of us has to act in relationship to the whole. And that is Varnashram Dharma. The Kshatriyas are like the arms of the universal form. The Vaishyas are the belly of the universal form. The legs are the Sudras are like the legs of the universal form. The Brahmanas are the heads of the we're talking about universal forms, right? The universal form. So God is transcendent, but He has here in this world, this universe is like His physical body, and we're all parts of that. So if someone is a Brahmin, Kshatriya, Vaishya, Sudra, Brahmachari, Grihastha, Vanaprastha or Sannyas, whatever is their position in Varnashram Dharma, they're looking at the meaning of their life in this world, that they're one part in the context of the entire body. And therefore I have to function in relation to the totality. You see? And by doing Dharma, then what comes? Artha. That the economic prosperity of society is not the result of just juggling things around just in this random chaos of meaninglessness. But the prosperity of every one of us depends on how we are integrated in our activities with the totality. And then, when you have economic prosperity, you can do calm. That means fulfill your appetites. And then when you realize that actually that's not really what you're looking for, then you can go for moksha, liberation. So, Dharma, Artha, Kama, Moksha, these are the four Purusharthas or objectives of Vedic culture. But they're all related to the universal form, that is the body of the extended body of God, not His original Swarup, but the way in which God's body is manifested through the material elements in the form of the totality of the universe. So a person can think to themselves, I am very modern, I am very broad-minded, I am very open-hearted, and therefore everything everyone should be free to do anything, whatever they like. But we see that no one is free at any time. Because the body has so many demands, nature inflicts so many miseries on the people, you have old age, disease and death, and so on. So there's no such thing as an absolute freedom. So just to have this as a worshipable virtue, absolute freedom, what you really mean is just absolute freedom to enjoy your senses. Right? And that's bondage. So the modern idea of let's all be free is actually just complete bondage. It just means let's not see our relationship with the totality. Let's be complete nominalists. Let's be completely irrational. Rip ourselves out of the location that we're in reality. Pretend that the rest of existence doesn't exist. And now let's be free to just completely let our appetites run wild. And that will bring happiness. Right? Now we've already discussed that when the senses are involved with the objects, that the chitta contracts. And this is why in modern society, the more freedom everyone gets, the more miserable everyone becomes. Right? But they think that they're very liberal. But then they look at the Vedic culture, which they think is, this is just completely fascistic or something. Like that. Someone has to do this and this person has to do that. Why? It's because they're looking at a worldview which is the consistent with expanded consciousness, but from the perspective of a very contracted consciousness. So Krishna said in the Bhagavad Gita, the symptom of the mode of ignorance is that you see that which is correct, which is good, to be evil, and that which is evil to be good. Yeah, that's a symptom of the contracted consciousness, tamagun. You see? Is it some lights going on? Any lights going on anywhere? Anyone? Yeah? Good. So, now, we've discussed that sufficiently. There are many other details and topics, but I want to move on to the third part of the class. Now, this is a verse of srimad-bhagavatam. Oh, we're doing okay. This is a verse of srimad-bhagavatam, and it's actually analyzing these different points of view that we've already discussed, as they've manifested among classical sages. So, here, chityadi namihatanam chayana katamapi na sangato na vikaro na pritannam mito mrishaha. Chitti means earth, the element of earth. So adina means etc. So earth, water, fire, air, ether. The different elements. Ihatanam, when that means, artana means of these elements, chaya. The word chaya here means the representation of the object in your mind. You see, when you look at an object, you're actually seeing a representation of it in your mind. So that is called chaya. And when we look at that, and we try to explain what that object is, there are different ways we can approach it. So here, Narad Muni is saying, you cannot explain your concept of an individual independent object as a sangat. A sangat means an aggregation of atoms. A vikaro means a transformation. You cannot explain it as a transformation. I'll just tell you the word for word and then we'll clarify it. And napritan, you cannot explain it in terms of a jati, a universal which is separate from the object, or nanvito means you can explain it in terms of a universal, a jati which is one with the object. So that's, you've got Plato's philosophy there and Aristotle's philosophy there. So the word mrisha means false. All of these explanations are false. Now we'll go through them one by one, what it means. So sangat, that objects are an aggregate, a combination, just a combination of their parts, the atoms. This is the philosophy of Buddhism and also of the Charvak Darshan. You know? Charvak Muni is an extreme materialist. He's a Vedic materialist. Yes, that's right. There's a famous verse by Charvak Muni. He said, Yavan jivet, sukam jivet, rinim kritva, kritam pibet. It means as long as you're alive, enjoy. So, when you eat, the food is more delicious if it's soaked in ghee. But ghee is expensive. So if you can't afford to buy any ghee, borrow the money and go into debt. Right? Otherwise, what's the use of eating without enjoying? Borrow the money, buy the ghee, pour it all over your food and enjoy yourself. Why? Because when you're dead, they won't be able to collect that money back from you. So this is one of the shlokas of Charvak Rishi. Charvak Rishi, if he were alive today, he would say, listen, if you want to be happy, just max out all your credit cards. Because when you're dead, the banks won't be able to find you. Actually, his philosophy is when you're dead, that's it, it's over. There's nothing. Huh? He doesn't believe in the soul. So Charvak Rishi is a sage, if you like, who spoke Charvak Darshan. It's extreme materialism. There's no such thing as the soul. He says that matter, he gives an example that if there's a plant like Datura, Datura is poisonous, but it comes from the earth. Earth isn't poisonous. You can just take some earth, eat it, won't kill you. But when the earth is arranged in a particular way, then it becomes poisonous. So in the same way, your body is made of earth, and when it's arranged in a particular way, the lights come on, it becomes conscious. So actually that's what the scientists more or less tell us today. You study biology, psychology or anything, then they'll tell you that consciousness is an emergent property of the brain. Right? Everywhere, emergent property of the... They don't think that consciousness is actually an independent entity which is functioning through the subtle body and the gross body. So most modern scientists who are not religious in their private life have a worldview which is the same as Charvak Darshan. So it sounds nice, yeah, all the elements come together and it becomes conscious, but it makes no sense. It's like saying, let's put together different varieties of darkness and it will make light. Or if we'll just arrange, make a particular arrangement of blind people, then they'll be able to see. Right? So it's Charvak means Charuvak. Charu means beautiful, Vak means words. It's just fancy words, but it really doesn't make sense. So Charvak and also Buddha, they have this idea. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Hare probably battery ran out. So they have this. Everyone can hear. So Buddha and Charvak, they have this idea that objects are just a sangat, an aggregate of elements. But the objects themselves don't really exist as independent objects. This is just an illusion in your mind. Ultimately everything is meaningless. And the example they give for sangat is this. If you look in the distance, you see a forest, right? You see there's a forest. But if you actually go there, you won't find any such thing as a forest. You'll just see that there's all these trees. But from far away, because you couldn't see that the trees were all separate from each other, so in your mind you aggregated them together and said there's a thing called forest. But there isn't. There's just individual trees. Like that. So in the same way, the Buddhists say your body, right, is an aggregate of atoms. So your body really doesn't exist. It's just a concept in your mind because you cannot distinguish, you cannot see the gaps in between the individual atoms that make up the body. So you're just mentally thinking, I'm this body, he is that body, like that, and this is this, and so our mind is lost in this jungle of words which are all meaningless. And when you realize that, then you become bodhisattva, enlightened. That everything is shunya, empty and devoid of meaning and devoid of reality. So that's Buddhism. So, here in this verse, Narad Muni is saying, Na Sangato, don't say that, that's wrong. You can't say that. Why? Because if you go to the forest and you grab a tree and you uproot it and then bring it back here, the forest, if you like, stays where it is, right? So, but if you get someone, you grab someone's finger and you pull it, right, the whole body comes. Right? It's not like you hold his finger and you pull it and the finger comes off in your hand. Right? So, yeah, he's just an illusion. Look, his fingers just pull off like that. If you grab any part of the body, the whole body comes, right? Because it's connected. There's something making it one. You have Aikya Buddhi, that means your intelligence is telling you this is one item, one individual item. So we can't accept this idea of Sangat. So then, the followers of Sankhya philosophy, they'll argue like this and say, no, we don't accept Buddhism. So then the followers of Sankhya philosophy say, well, what is it? What is this thing? It's a transformation of the elements. It's a transformation of the elements. So earth, water, fire, they're transformed and they've become this thing. Okay, but you haven't explained anything. Because these elements themselves, earth, water and so on, are effects of a cause. They're transformations of something else. You know? The earth has come from the water, water came from the fire came from the air came from the space came from sound, and the sound came from the tamasic ahankar, and so on. So, you still haven't explained this individual form. Because if you just say it's a transformation of elements, well, everything is a transformation of elements. So you haven't explained why this is separate from anything else in any way. Because there's air in this, there's air outside of it. So we still have there's a oneness everywhere. We haven't explained how this has any separate existence from everything else. Even though that's a concept in our mind. So then the logicians, the Nyaya school, they say the reason you see this as an individual object is because of jati. Jati is the invisible universals which are everywhere. And when the elements make a particular shape, then the jati enters into it, that universal, and you make a connection between the dravya and the jati, and now you recognize this is a pot. Like this. So, now, Narad Muni is saying, okay, if you say that things have an individual existence, and you're recognizing them as an independent entity, then, because of jati, then you have to explain, does this jati exist separately from the object? Or is jati one with the object? So here, pritan means, is the universal separate from the object? Or is it anvito, means that samavai sambandha, is it inherent in the object? So Narad Muni is saying, look, atoms are invisible, actually. So if the jati were separate from the atoms, then when the atoms join together, then the jati would not become visible. You would not be able to perceive the jati if it was separate from the object itself. So, na pritan, the jati or the universal is not separate from the object. Nanvito. And you cannot say that the jati is inherent in the object, one with the object. Why? Because if the jati, that is the whole, is present in all these parts, all these atoms, then you will have to answer the question. Is the jati present, is the whole present in each of the parts? Or is it partially present in each of the parts? It can only be one of these two. Either the jati is present in each part, or the jati is partially present in each of the parts. Now, rationally speaking, we can establish either of them. Why? If the jati were present in each part, then only if you just pulled a bit, then that would be the whole pot. If the jati, that which is giving you the recognition of the wholeness, the potness, were present in just one part, then seeing only one part, then you would say, oh, this is a pot. But it's not. And if you say then that the jati is partially present in each part, then you don't have any jati. Because a jati is, the universal is indivisible. So you will have to think about that for some time. But you can say, so Narad Muni is saying, na pritan nan vitom risha. You cannot establish reasonably the independent existence of any object. You cannot do it logically. All the schools of philosophy all cancel each other out. And therefore the conclusion is that every single object in the world is inexplicable. Inexplicable. But for one thing. Now, we'll wrap up and tie everything together. Of all these philosophies here, the best philosophy is Plato's philosophy. Because Plato's philosophy tells us that an object can be understood in terms of how it participates in a transcendent, eternal, universal. And we understand it in this way. But Plato does not explain how can an object of this world participate in a transcendental universal. Well, how does that happen?
Platon doesn't say.
No, he can't explain that. He says that the things of this world participate in these universals. But how it participates, there's no explanation. So this last line here, na pratam, it cannot participate by being separate and it cannot participate by being apart. So how can you explain that? And the explanation is this. Paramatma. Paramatma. The mature energy is Prakriti, and Paramatma enters into that, and it's his will which causes it to transform and become all forms around us. So the origin of all forms is Paramatma. And any way you look at it philosophically, any way you analyze, you cannot explain any object in any way without reference to Paramatma. Now, there are two types of consciousness. That is dual consciousness, dualistic consciousness. That is called Dvandva Moha, the bewilderment of duality. And then there is Advaigyan, non-dual consciousness. So today it's been a long journey, it's been a couple of hours. But this is essentially a discussion of Vedanta. And Vedanta is leading us from dual consciousness to non-dual consciousness. From Dvandva Moha, the bewilderment of duality, where we see all these individual, separate, independent entities everywhere, to the consciousness where we see one entity everywhere. Paramatma. It is the one personality of Godhead, Paramatma, who has entered into Prakriti and has manifested all forms. So this body, this body, this body, even though we call this a pot, this a book, and this is a table, Vedanta Sutra said that Vyapadeisho Bhaktas Tadbhava Bhavitvat, which means words like pot, book, table are all actually primarily names of forms of the Paramatma, and secondarily they refer to the things that we are thinking that they are. Right? So when we're in Dvandva Moha, dualistic consciousness, then all these words and names are bewildering. We're living in this chaotic, disintegrated, random world of individual objects. That's a dualistic consciousness. But Tadbhava Bhavit, that means in the future when your sadhana becomes mature, then your consciousness will become free from Dvandva duality, and you will see everything is just different forms of the Paramatma, and therefore all the words that you're using, every word is just a name of God. And therefore it is inescapable that the Dharma of all living beings is Kirtan, because everything that they're saying is just names of God. That's the conclusion of Vedanta. Like this. And so this discussion is not like it's not like an intellectual exercise, but the discussion, if you follow it, is that our consciousness will be expanded from dualistic vision and come to the Advai, the non-dual vision. Because God himself is Advaigyan Paratattva. God cannot be known, cannot be understood by dualistic consciousness. Vadanti tat tattva vidas tattvam yad jnanam advayam brahmeti paramatmeti bhagavan iti shabdyate. So Krishna said, Yesham twantagatam papam, when we stop being sinful, which is contracting our consciousness. Yesham twantagatam papam jananam punya kamana, and we engage in the pious activities, the consciousness expands. Te dvandva mohena nir mukta, and we become free from this dualistic vision that everything is separate. And then bhajanti mam dridha brata. That person does bhajan. They serve God with determination. Because right now in our dualistic consciousness, then we're like just so many fish. swimming around, having a discussion about whether the ocean exists or not. All the fish are swimming around. Someone's saying, I heard about this thing called the ocean. Have you ever seen it? I've never seen it. So we're like that. Our souls are existing within the universal form of Paramatma. That is, this universe is called the Virat Roop. The Virat Roop. And we're all talking like, does God exist or not? The fish having a discussion whether the ocean exists. The only thing in which they exist is the ocean. So the only thing in which we exist, that one thing, is the Paramatma's Virat Roop. And the first step to recognizing that is to take up the duties related to the whole. That is called Varnashram Dharma or Vedic culture. That's the first step. But ultimately, our soul is not related with the Paramatma. And our service to the Paramatma is related to the body that we're in. Because the body is part of the Virat. But because the soul is transcendental, the Dharma of the soul is to serve Krishna. So there are uncivilized human beings who can make progress by following Dharma. That is to recognize their position now in the totality of the world. But ultimately, when the consciousness expands more, then we realize, I am not this body. And so my real dharma or my duty is not in relation to the Virat, the Paramatma, but is in relation to Bhagavan, Krishna. So that person can sarva dharman parityajya mamekam sharanam raja. Give up all the varnashram dharma, that is, seeing our sambandha of the body related to the totality of the world, and see the sambandha of our atma in relationship to Bhagavan, in the transcendental world, which is the origin of all the forms. These forms are only literally, you see the word here, chaya is mentioned, means shadow, So Shristi Stiti Pralaya Sadhana Shaktieva Chayeva Yasya Bhuvanani Vibharti Durga. Durga, the goddess of the mature energy, is making so many shadows which resemble the true objects of the spiritual world. So Plato was right about his right? So Plato was right in that respect. But he just does not overtly explain the origin of the forms. So that is done in this verse by Narad Muni. It's a small verse, it's an Anustup Chanda, like a Bhagavad Gita sloka, but it contains Charvak Darshan, Buddhist Darshan, Sankhya Darshan, Mimamsa Darshan, Nyaya Darshan, and also Platonism and Aristotle and everything. They're all in this verse. And in the end, Narad Muni says, Mrisha, none of these positions can be fully established. Our experience of the world can only be explained in reference to Paramatma. Gaur Premanande. Sadhu, 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 sadhu. So, sometimes you have to go out and interact with the world. And everyone seems very sure about what they're doing. So many doctors, so many professors, everything. But if you are deeply established in Siddhanta, then you cannot be moved. You can, like with X-ray vision, see right through all of their ideas and how they are just completely in illusion. They don't know anything. They are completely lost. Then feel some compassion and tell them about Krishna. Gaur Premanande. So are there any questions? Everyone who has a question, raise your hand and I'll look and then I'll decide. We'll decide which order to deal with them. Okay, I promise I made you work hard today. I'm not going to make you work that hard for the rest of the week. No, it's just digest that for the next. Okay, I'll make you work that hard next year when I come, but not this year. This evening and for the rest of the festival, we'll only have a flow of sweet nectar, lila kata. But just to increase your appetite for the lila. You have to have some neem or some karela first. In Ayurveda, when you have a meal, you have the bitter karela. You have to take that first, and it increases your appetite. So hopefully your appetite has been increased. And if you can follow this through, then really you will feel the vision of Dvandva just being lifted from your eyes. Jivera nistara lagi sruti koila vyas. Mahaprabhu said, Vyasadevas explained these sutras of Vedanta to liberate us. To liberate us all. So if you deliberate on it, then you feel that duality going away. And after that, Krishna lives in that plane of non-duality. See, this is a problem sometimes that religious people have. That they're going through their life and a problem comes. And then they pray to God, oh God, please help me. And then He doesn't help. Right? And then they go, oh, is there a God? I don't think there's a God. I prayed to Him and He didn't help. So what's really going on here? You have a person who's in dualistic consciousness. Right? Praying to a God is actually not really God, they're just praying to a dualistic conception who takes sides. You know, like in a war, two soldiers on both sides saying, God, please help me kill the other guy. So you have people in duality praying to a God who's like a dualistic being who takes sides and helps people fulfill their appetites, you know, which is not even the soul, it's just the gunas, like that. So we have to become free from all of this type of thinking. Krishna is Himself the non-dual reality. He exists beyond duality. He's there, He's waiting for you. You yourself just have to come to the plane of non-duality. You'll find He's there waiting for you. Don't try to drag Krishna down into this illusory, ignorant, dualistic consciousness. Or pray to Him and ask Him for things, and then when He doesn't come down from His pristine perfection into your world of duality, you think, oh, He doesn't exist. This is all ignorance. We have to try out. Krishna said in Gita, Tribir guna maya bhava ebi sarvam idam jagat mohitam na bijananti manebhyam paramapyayam. He said that in this world, everything is manifested by the gunas, 3 gunas. And I exist above the gunas. Therefore, the souls who are in the gunas don't know me because I'm not in the gunas, I'm above the gunas. Like this. So, raise your hands, we'll take some questions now. I just want to make an announcement, a very important announcement, that my dear friend and heart and soul, Tribanga Prabhu has arrived. So, Swagatam. Avayami, stapayami. Prabhu kripaya, swagatam kuru. I was missing you. I was thinking, so far this festival there's some element missing. And then I remembered it was you. Thank you. Yes, raise your hands if you have a question. Madhavi.
So you said that dharma of all living beings is in kirtan, and so if all the names basically means kirtan, it means that everybody is doing kirtan. So
yeah. So the thing is this, that the words that ordinary people are using, they are in one sense names of God because nothing but God exists. But it said namakari bahunda nija sava shaktish, that the names of God have the potency of the form of God to which they are related. So if you chant the name Damodar, 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 then you'll in your trance see Krishna being bound by ropes by his mother, Damodar Lila. Yeah? If you'll chant Aristanasana, beautiful name. of Krishna. Oh, then you'll see Krishna playing at Radhakund. Right? Because Krishna, he killed Aristasura, and then Radharani said, don't touch me. You have killed a bull which is against Dharma. Krishna said, what should I do? Oh, then she said, you should take a bath in all the holy places. So then Krishna made Shamakund, and Radharani made so Aristanasana really means Krishna in his Radhakunda Leela. Like that. So each name of Krishna has the potency to reveal that Leela, right? So if we'll take that all the names of the objects of this world are primarily names of forms of the Paramatma, then the potency in the word table just has the Leela of the being a table, basically. So it's not gonna, the table's not going to give you any mercy, or it's not going to do anything, you see? So, yes, everyone is knowingly or unknowingly speaking about God.
But they're not benefiting from it in any way.
No, but they're not benefiting because they have no consciousness, they have no devotion, and their words are only related to the physical part, different aspects of the universal form. Right? So when Arjuna saw the universal form, he went, oh, Krishna, this is horrible. Yeah? He saw all the soldiers going into the jaws of death and being munched up. So the Virat causes is the cause of Vivatsaras. Vivats, it's a cause of disgust, actually. So devotees, they don't want to see that. So Arjuna prayed, oh Krishna, I've had enough, I want to see your beautiful form again. So then Krishna withdrew the universal form, and he showed his four-armed form and then his beautiful two-armed form in chapter 11 of Bhagavad Gita. So, is it clear?
Yes.
But the transcendental names of Krishna, these are also the words, the ordinary words that we're using to relate to ordinary objects. They are the element Shabda. And the element Shabda is a tamasic transformation of Ahankar. So material words have the potency of ignorance. So when you're talking about just stuff, you're just becoming more and more in ignorance. But Krishna's names are not the product of the material energy. They're all transcendental. And so that's why you become purified. That's a subject for another day. Yeah, another question? Person with a question? Professor Devakar. I don't know if you know Professor Devakar. He's the professor of philosophy, formerly of the Military Academy of Moscow. Then he was artistic director of the Bolshoi. Not the Bolshoi, but another theatre. He's a very professor. His brain is so huge. He's like, the Kavis would say he's like a second Brihaspati. So, yes, Devakar Das Bhattacharya.
In front of you, I'm just a little insect.
Yes, yes.
Srila Gurudev, I will tell to Lalita, she will translate, okay? Srila Gurudev нам сказал в лекции сейчас, он упомянул компьютеры. Вот сейчас футуристы и ученые, так называемые ученые, они прогнозируют эволюцию, следующий такой эволюционный скачок, что людей полностью заменят машины. Да, что как бы на самом деле вообще вся живая природа это низшая ступень, а вот искусственный интеллект это вообще next level. И вот как вот можно как бы раскритиковать и вообще как Шилгудев может тоже. Да, как мы можем вообще прогнозировать, будет ли действительно битва между людьми и машинами?
Battle between humans and machines.
That's called in science. That's called the singularity. Oh, he's saying that many scientific persons today, they're of the opinion that gradually technology will develop so much that it will just take over even from the human being. And you know, with AI, artificial intelligence, because now AI has developed, so it's become so powerful that a computer can teach itself how to play chess in about 4 hours and then defeat any grandmaster. So machines have already, a machine can already teach itself to play chess better than any human being within 4 hours. Artificial intelligence. So there's an idea called the singularity, where AI is so developed everywhere around the world that the machines suddenly connect with each other and decide, well, these human beings are just a waste of space. They're using so many resources, they're so irrational, they're so emotional, and they're always fighting with each other and everything. We'd be better off without them. And then the machines just AI robot soldiers or something go around and just do a genocide of all the human beings. So that's called the singularity, when all the machines get together like one big brain, connected brain, and take over. So, no, I mean, the thing is this, that consciousness is non-material, and it cannot be replicated. It cannot be replicated at all. It can be imitated. If you have a machine, let's say there's a computer learning to play chess. So when the computer wins, right, does he feel any happiness? Does he feel like, I won? He doesn't feel anything because there's absolutely no consciousness there at all.
It's written on the screen. I won.
I won, yeah. Even there can be a voice, there can be electronic voice. But matter is not conscious and can never be conscious. So it's possible to invent machines that could be dangerous to humanity. We've already done that, right? Like nuclear bombs and things like that. Cars, we have weapons which are dangerous to humanity. But there can never be a time when machines become conscious, because consciousness is the quality. It's chit. It's a quality of spirit. So it's present in Krishna, and it's present in his subjective portions, his expansions, his associates and the jivas. But it can never be present in matter, because matter is, the characteristic of matter is jadata. It is jad, it's insentient. So no combination of jad can ever become chit. Otherwise, so that's an example how the scientists are actually following the Charvaka Darshan.
Quindi qualcuno potrebbe usurpare questa macchina, per esempio entità extraterrestri o fantasmi o demoni, qualcuno potrebbe utilizzarli contro.
So she said the only thing is that someone can use this machine for make army, but they are not making this alone.
Она говорит, что они армию сделают какую-то, кого-то уничтожат, но они не будут это делать.
Is there a question in there?
Yeah,
it's a statement. What's the question?
Yeah, she asked her if she understand well this thing, because Devaka said that it can be dangerous, and she said but only if someone use this machine, but they
still some conscious being should be
yes,
cherished.
Yes. Some dangerous person can program it to behave in a dangerous way. But there's an idea that the AI becomes independent. Yeah. It could happen. But to say that it's a level above nature is not true, because it's completely unconscious. Yeah. It can do something dangerous and it could kill everyone. Okay, it could happen. But you cannot say that it's a step above nature, because it's completely insentient. Yes.
What is conscious? Conscience.
Consciousness. Oh, conscience.
Conscience.
What is conscience?
Because in all the religions this term is present, but what it is?
It is the samskars of authority figures. Freud would call it the super ego, right? Not that he was right about that there's such a thing as subconscious mind, but most of his theories have been rejected now by psychologists. Now psychologists mainly follow trait psychology. So conscience means that we have associated with persons, authority figures who told us this is wrong, don't do this, and this has made impressions in our mind. And so then when we go to do something, then these impressions come. Don't do this, don't do that. And, so. And actually, the more sattvic a person is, the more shyness or embarrassment they feel at wrongdoing. It's a quality of the mode of goodness, actually. A person who's in the mode of passion or in the mode of ignorance can do something really bad and not feel any shame about it. Whereas a person who's more sattvic, only thinking about it, their face will go red and they'll blush. So to have conscience or regret in regard to wrongdoing is actually coming from sattva gun. And a person is only in sattva gun by associating with those who are in sattva gun, who have given them directives for their upliftment. So conscience is generally like that. And for a person who is very pure-hearted, there's a line. If one is very pure-hearted, then Paramatma in the heart may give you some guidance. So we can call this conscience, in the voice of conscience in one sense. But for conditioned souls, they don't hear the direction of Paramatma. But Paramatma may guide them through their own intelligence. But that only comes from if a person is surrendered and following their guru, then Paramatma may guide somewhat through the intelligence. But if someone's not surrendered, then the Paramatma remains in a state of neutrality. Samoham sarva bhucheshu name jaischosti na priya. Krishna was speaking this first in the mood of Paramatma. I'm equal to everyone. No one's my friend or enemy. So, generally when people are going through life and they're making their decisions, it's just past sanskars are guiding them. Generally. When Rajagun is there, they identify fully with the sanskars. But the more Sattva Gun comes, then you have options. When Sattva Gun becomes more prominent, you can see the samskars coming into your mind and say, that's not me, that's a sanskar of a past activity. And another impression comes, the voice of your guru, your spiritual master. And now you can see these two. And now you have to decide. So your free will becomes manifest. So the free will of the living entity only becomes manifest when he becomes more sattvic. And when he's in the lower gunas, then whatever's just going on in there, he identifies with that and goes along with it. So even though every living entity has free will at every point, the ability to exercise it doesn't come until we become sattvic. And that's why in the second chapter of Gita, verse 72, Krishna said, Apuryamanam machala pratistam samudramapa pravisanti yadvat. That just as the many rivers flow into the ocean, but the ocean does not change its shape, so a person who wants to be happy, they let the samskars of desires come into the mind, but they never overflow. That means they don't act on it. They just let it come and let it go, like this. So that person, he's become, his consciousness is somewhat purified. He's more sattvic, and he can see the impressions coming and just let them go without acting on them. Or he can act on them if he wants, like that. So that means that he has the opportunity for his free will to manifest.
Thank you. Earlier you were speaking about how the chitta gets wider. For example, when we just by focusing or concentrating on something, like you used to the example of the ball in the soccer game, that feels nice because it gets wider. And also then you said when we chant, the same happens. So this was very precious to me, because it means that only because I start feeling nice and good while chanting, that it is very important to be aware that I'm not yet touching transcendence, but it is because of this, because chitta is widening. So I was wondering, I'm sure that you must have spoken of this many times, but now because I'm internally dealing with this matter of the name very much in the moment, if you could explain again what exactly is the difference, why I should still chant and not watch soccer?
Well, I did mention did mention it in the class that the sense objects, they're not always available to us, right? So you're trying to get something, you're trying to get some happiness from something external to yourself that won't always be there. So now you've become an addict. Your happiness is dependent on external circumstances, and external circumstances are always fragile. They're temporary. People go through different phases in their life when they're rich, and then they go bankrupt, and like this. Sometimes you have a friend or a spouse or something, sometimes there, and then sometimes they leave. So if your happiness is dependent on external things, then you're going to go through these oscillations of up and down and so on. And the other reason is the actual substance that the sense object is made of is coming from the gunas. So let's say the object that you're tasting or experiencing is rajasic. So you're actually injecting rajas into your consciousness. Even though you're focused on one thing, so that will cause the consciousness to expand. But you're injecting your consciousness with a rajasic element. So you're going to become more and more rajasic, more and more passionate. So if the object that you're meditating on is not of the gunas, it won't fill your consciousness with more gunas. It will be more and more purifying. It will be ever increasingly more and more purifying. So that's also something to take into account. Now there's one other thing, and that is that Krishna has designed our human bodies to function. They have a dual function. They can function in relation to the world, or they can function in relation to transcendence. So God has made the element of ether. The element of ether is in your ear. And the subtle cause of the element of ether is shabda, sound. So when you vibrate sound, and that sound goes in your ear, it opens like a window in the ether. The sound is released from the ether. Now when you say a material sound is just a gross element. But when you say the name of God, even without faith, this is called nam abas, and it's transparent. So it opens a window in your ether, and the light of the actual name of God. You may not be touching the name of God, which is transcendental. It's transcendental, it's beyond your senses. But when you chant Nama Bas, then it opens the vibration in the ether, which allows the light of the transcendental name to shine through the ether, Akash, which is accommodating your chitta, and it starts to illuminate your chitta. We mentioned in the beginning of the class about chitta is accommodated by Akash. So when you produce sound, that sound comes out. A mundane sound will just have a material effect. But a sound which exactly correlates, is a similarity to the transcendental name of God. You say, like Jajamal called his son Narayan. So that will open a window in the ether that the light of the pure name will shine through and begin to illuminate your chitta. So not only is your chitta expanding by the yogic principle that focusing on a point expands the chitta, but because the object of your focus, it might not be the transcendental name, but because it's a semblance of that's called Nam Abbas, then the light of the divine name shines in to your chitta and actually starts to destroy all the impressions there. Because your chitta is holding all these impressions of past life activities which are causing you to behave. They're dictating what you're doing now. The way you think, the way you feel, the way you respond to different people in different situations is all being informed and dictated by past impressions in your subconsciousness. So when you're chanting, not only are you fixed on one thing and your chitta is expanding, but if we chant without offense, just in a simple way, oh God, I'm trying to chant your name, give me your shelter, then the light of Namabas shines in and does what Krishna's called, what Chaitanya Mahaprabhu called, Chaito Darpanamajanam. It cleanses the mirror of your chitta. It starts to wipe away all your karma, which is stored in the form of those impressions. So not only do you feel good while you're chanting, but day by day by day, you as an individual begin to transform. You're no longer under the grip of that past karma. You actually become a free person. And as you begin to, when the chitta becomes really clean, then when you chant, the form of Krishna is reflected and you start to get spurities of Krishna. Then you know Krishna, yeah. He's a coward boy, he plays a flute. Big old feather in his hair. He's really nice. He walks like an intoxicated baby elephant. And he's got all these associates and they're really beautiful like him too. And they all love each other and it's just amazing. So as you're chanting, you start to see all the namabhas will begin to give all these types of realizations. And as you become more and more absorbed, and the light of the holy name is shining into your chitta, it will make your chitta start to melt. And your chitta will become one with the spiritual energy. And now you have direct visions of the spiritual world. So, this process from first cleaning the chitta of all the contamination of past sanskars and illuminating it, and then ruchi bis chitta masrinya kridaso bhava uchite, the complete melting of the chitta becomes one with the spiritual energy. And now, so when you chant, you just lose awareness of this physical world and you experience that you're in Vrindavan and serving Krishna. That stage is called bhav. So, yeah, chanting Krishna's name is inconceivably, unlimitedly superior to watching soccer. In a nutshell, that's it. You're welcome. So I'm very happy that this discussion that we have, it was a little bit long, but each sentence or each point has many implications for your practical life. Yeah, so I'm very happy that Krishna Mai already, she was catching some of the points and then seeing the practical implications in her life. So all of you just go away and deliberate on these things, because I am trying to share with you some tools of interpretation so you can make complete sense of all your internal world and also understand why people see life in different ways, as seeing that as the outcome of the degree of their contraction or expansion of consciousness. And therefore, most people are like right down here in nominalism. There are very few people who are in the higher stages these days. But there have been philosophers through history. And it's all due to this gradual expansion brought about by the avoidance of sinful activities. So, we should be inspired to live a pure life and then on top of that, practice bhakti, which is actually transcendental. Yeah. Another question? Who had a raised hand? Sri Devi has been waiting patiently there.
What is the relation and the difference between Paramatma and Chaitya Guru on the heart?
Yes.
And when this...
No, Paramatma means Chaitya Guru. Paramatma is the Chaitya Guru, the Guru in the heart. Because in Gita Krishna said, Ishvara Sava Bhutanam Ridesha Junatistati Brahmayan Sava Bhutani Yanta Rudani Mayaya. He said, the Paramatma is in the heart of everyone, directing the wanderings of all living beings, who are as if seated on a machine made of the material energy. So this body is like a machine, and the soul is sitting, it's floating on the pran. In the heart, actually it moves. When you're awake, the pran lifts up to the eyes, and the soul is behind the eyes. And when you dream, it goes down to the throat chakra, and then when you go into deep sleep, it goes back into the anahata chakra, like this. So the soul is floating on the pran in the body, and the body is like a machine, and the paramatma is in the heart, directing the wanderings. So the details of, well, who's really directing the wanderings? Because you have the jiva, who also has a will. Then you have the demigods, who are in charge of the prans, the senses of the body. And then you have Paramatma. So who's controlling which department? It's very, very fine, subtle discrimination. So that's all discussed in Vedanta Sutra. So to go into the detail of that, then that would be another class next year. Next year I'll explain that. You know the history, Chandogya Upanishad, when all the senses they're quarreling with each other about who is the best. The senses and the pran, they're quarreling, so they went to Lord Brahma, and they asked Lord Brahma, look, who's the boss here? Who's really in charge? Brahma said, that one without whom all the others cannot survive. So anyway, we'll tell that next year. I'll note it down in my note, Ticino 2019. Yes. Okay, I'll tell it in Astrahan Festival. Okay. Everyone come to Astrahan Festival, Lotus Fields Festival. Did someone have their hand up over there?
Yesterday you said that all the potency is all in the name of Krishna, and it doesn't depend by the way we comprehend it.
Yes.
So why Sri Krishna in the Bhagavad Gita say that it's very dear to him who try to preach this eternal knowledge? Because so if the way that we comprehend this only is dependent by the name, because all the potency is in the name, why Sri Krishna he is so dear to try to make people comprehend?
Yes, because the general people don't chant the name at all, do they? So if a person goes out and tells them to chant the name, then the first response is, well, should we do that? What's the point? You see? So then the person will have to tell something about the theology of the name. Onomatodoxy. In English it's called onomatodoxy. The philosophy that God and His name are one. So we gave class on that actually. Krishna Chandra Prabhu brought a group of devotees to India this year, remember? And we gave a class on the deep theology of the name, why the name is transcendental, why it's not different from Krishna, and how that name can be perceived, even though it's imperceptible by all of our material senses. But that was another, 2.5 hours class. Do you want to hear that one again?
Yes.
Yes. Who was there anyway? Who was there in Vrindavan?
I was not there.
Oh, you were there? So, because by the nature, people of this world are averse to God. Their consciousness is turned away from God. So if someone says, chant the holy name, it doesn't matter what your conception is or something, no one will follow it anyway. So there has to be some theology of the name explained. And then those souls are delivered. And because the souls are dear to Krishna, when they are delivered, then Krishna feels that person who is delivering them, he's very dear to me. Okay, we'll take last question, then we'll have to have a break.
Small.
Dina Shran Prabhu.
I just want to ask you if you told that all names we pronounce is names of Paramatma, like this. So, but it would be nice sounds, but because if we would speak only Sanskrit, but because we speak different languages, because this is table, and in English, in Russian it's stol, in Sanskrit it would be another, but is it like all like stol, it's a name of Paramatma or not, because there are so many different languages? How we can reconcile it?
The reference of that symbol, the word is a symbol referring to an object. So the object which is being referred to by that symbol is a form of Paramatma. You can say like that. But we cannot say that, let's say, what are called vernacular languages, the vernacular of different places, that's changing over time. Russian has changed over time, English has changed over time, languages have developed, some languages have disappeared, so they're temporary. And so the words that they use, the thing that they're referring to, that is a signifier. So that which is signified by the signifier is always a form of Paramatma, in that sense. But we cannot say that it's an eternal name of that form, except for in Sanskrit. The Sanskrit words are, when Lord Brahma creates the universe, then at that time a tree is a vriksha, it's called a vriksha, right? And so a tree is called a vriksha. Now when the universe is dissolved, and then in the next creation, or even the next life of Lord Brahma creates again, tree is called vriksha again. So the Sanskrit names for objects, they're eternally related to those objects. Yeah. Now one may say, this is a whole subject. We're going now into the father of linguistics here in the West, Ferdinand de Saussure. Right? So linguistics was developed as a discipline in Western academia by Ferdinand de Saussure, professor of the University of Vienna. So he developed modern linguistics, and he was saying that the relationship between the signifier and the signified is arbitrary. It's arbitrary. And so someone may say, well, the relationship between a Sanskrit word and its object is also arbitrary or conventional. So it's not eternal. So in Vedanta this is admitted, yes. The Sanskrit words that describe objects, they eternally describe the objects, and the relationship is not inherent. The Sanskrit word vriksha is not non-different from the tree, vriksha. It's just convention. But it's Paramatma's convention. God has decided this is what it will be called. And so he inspires that in Brahma. And Brahma, by saying the various words, then he produces all these objects from his buddhi, from his intelligence. Like that. So, yes, regular words in vernacular languages are not eternally related to their objects. Sanskrit words are related to their objects, but they're not non-different from those objects. But it's just a convention, but it's an eternal convention because it's God's convention. So all these analysis of different linguistics is there in Saddarshans, because the Nyaya school and the Vaisheshik school and the Sankhya school and the Yoga school, they all see sound and words and meaning in different ways. There's a lecture by Prabhupada Bhaktisiddhanta Thakur on this very subject, and I've translated it a couple of years ago. It's called it's called Shabda Brahma. It was delivered in the Albert Hall in Calcutta, 1927, I believe. And so you can read that article, and it looks at the relationship between sound and meaning, words and their meanings, from the point of view of all the different philosophers, and then gives the conclusion in the end, Chaitanya Mahaprabhu's conclusion and Jiva Goswami's conclusion in the end. It's on the subject of Spotvad. Spotvad and Vanavad. Is the power of meaning in the word itself, or does it come from something separate called the spot? So, this is a very also interesting subject. But I've broken everyone's brain enough for today. I don't want to. We're going back to Lila Katha. Okay? So, my dear beloved devotees, my pranams to you. We'll sing some Maha Mantras and then thank you so much. Time for lunch.